Have you seen the musical Matilda? I saw it on Friday night. At the school Matilda attends, the person in charge of the school tells the children that in this world, there are winners and there are losers. And she says, in this world, children, there are winners and there are losers. You are small, shriveled, foul-smelling, and weak. You are losers, children, and you shall always be revolting. So, spoiler alert, the children decide that they will be revolting, and they revolt in a big way. It's an over-the-top imaginative story that picks up themes from the real world about what it means to be a winner or a loser. Who is great and who is not so great. And in Matilda, it is very easy to tell who is great and who is not great. In the world in which we live, I'm not sure it's as easy to tell. We receive very mixed messages. But just like the disciples of Jesus, who were arguing back and forth about who was the greatest, we participate in that contest all of the time. Back in 2004, CBC had this television show they called The Greatest Canadian, and people voted on who they thought was indeed the greatest Canadian who ever lived. Tommy Douglas won that round, followed closely by Terry Fox. In the sports world, you'll often hear about GOATs, greatest of all time, like New York Yankees relief pitcher Mariano Rivera. He has more than 650 saves. Or there's Michael Phelps, the swimmer with 18 Olympic gold medals. Or Usain Bolt, the Jamaican sprinter. But start talking about tennis, and quickly arguments will start to arise about whether Serena Williams, with her titles in 17 major championships, or Steffi Graf with her 22 major titles, is the greatest of all time. And on Thursday night, in this place, when the junior choir was practicing and dividing themselves into parts, there quickly arose a rivalry about which part would be best. But were they best because they could sing their part the loudest, or because they sang the right notes? Or were they best because they were werewolves, and the other group was pretending to be penguins? At one point, the werewolves told me that they could keep singing because they just ate a penguin wing. And indeed, your place on the food chain has often determined your level of at least perceived greatness. So how do we decide what is great? What does it mean, for example, to live in a great country? Is it one that produces the most Olympic athletes, or the most content and happy citizens? Is it great because it makes the most money, or because it makes the world safer? Is it great because it is modern and progressive, or because its people treat one another with kindness and compassion? What would we mean if we were to say that we would like to live in a great country, or a great community, or a great church? Simon Anhold actually started studying this sort of thing back in the 1990s. His first study sampled 70% of the entire world's population to see what people were thinking about other countries. And when conducting the study, he thought that when people are asked what makes a country great, that the richest countries would come out on top. But what he discovered was that people were not impressed by countries that were rich or powerful or modern or successful, but rather countries that were not selfish. Countries that contributed to the rest of the world to make it safer or better or fairer or together richer. He discovered, too, that while people often thought that if you cared about those things within your own borders, you couldn't care about them beyond your borders. But that was absolutely untrue. Indeed, in this increasingly global world, there is also an increasing sense that the human race is kind of in this thing together, and that we will all progress further by collaborating rather than competing with one another. And so it led him to a different kind of study, something he started calling the Good Country Index. And he would measure how much countries would contribute to the good of humanity. And he was very clear, this is not a definition of being morally good. It's not the good, the opposite of bad, for those are discussions that would really be never ending. But he could and would be able to measure global contributions to the areas of science and technology, to culture, to international peace and security, to world order, to planet and climate health, to prosperity and equality and health and well-being. So, any guesses on which countries in 2018 are doing the most good in the world? Canada is number 14 on the list. The top three are the Netherlands, Switzerland, and Denmark. And Anholt suggests that before we go to bed at night, we might all want to be grateful that those countries exist in the world. But that's the scoring overall. If you break down the categories, you find out some different, but also very interesting things. Number one in the world in contributions to science and technology for the world is actually the Ukraine. Contributions to planet and climate are given mostly by Iceland. Ireland is number one in contributions to prosperity and equality. And Samoa provides the greatest global contributions to international peace and security. I am intrigued by these separate categories because it reminds me that we all bring different gifts to the table. Do you know the story about the time the fingers had an argument about which one was most important? Yes, the fingers. The first finger said that he was most important because he was the one who gave directions when someone was lost. The second finger said she was most important because she was the tallest. She believed that only big people can do big things, and frankly, sometimes she was a bit rude about it. The next finger said that he was most important because he was the wealthiest. He got to wear the ring. The littlest finger thought and thought and thought, and then it came to her. I'm most important because I'm the toughest. Toughest? They thought you're the smallest. Yeah, but I'm the one on the edge. I'm the one who gets scraped on the wall or knocked when something's going by. When someone gets excited or mad and hits their book, I get the brunt of it. But the thumb was wise and asked each of the fingers if they could pick up a coin by themselves. Ever tried it? Not so easy. So which is the greatest finger? Well, in the Bible story, the disciples don't want to tell Jesus that they've been arguing about which is the greatest. They already knew that he would tell them that they were missing the point. So he doesn't have to tell them. They know it. So what he does is he picks up a child who would have been thought about in his culture in much the same way as described in Matilda the musical, small and weak and insignificant. And when he picked up that child, he said to his friends, "Whoever wants to be first must be least of all and servant of all." Well, in this world, to suggest that vulnerability and servanthood equals greatness is in some ways ridiculous. It's certainly not what the world says to us about greatness. And yet our experience tells us that that is exactly right. We know what we truly value in the people who are around us. In his TED Talk from 2014, Simon Anholt asks whether it might be possible for us to start using the word good rather than great. To ask ourselves, when we start thinking about countries and our government's actions, for example, is that what a good country would do? Or what about companies or communities? What about us? Could we measure ourselves by whether or not what we do, small, large, or minuscule, is actually good? Can you imagine a world where someone might have cause to fall asleep thinking, I'm glad you exist in the world? I'm thinking that would make God happy. And it just might be pretty great, don't you think? May it be so. Amen.